Hello everyone, Gio here. So, as of writing this, I have just uploaded my video on the Escapologist, and as of writing this video, NetEase also released the reveal trailer yesterday. In the livestream, we got to see a lot of new content, such as the anniversary event. We also got to see a lot of new skins, including the Logic Pad skin, which went to Lucky Guy. However, those aren't really stuff that I'm interested in talking about, as you all know. No, what I'm most interested in is the core gameplay changes that were revealed in the showcase. And it's not even character changes as well. There are actual changes happening to the normal matches. So, in today's video, we will be analyzing those changes, and I will give my opinions on them. For a disclaimer, I will not be covering the character-specific changes that were revealed in the stream. We don't know if this will be all the changes or if there will be more character changes planned out. Because of that, I think it'd be better if we just focus on the other changes that are happening in the game. When the end of the season happens though, we will be covering those character changes, don't worry. With that out of the way, let's finally get into the discussion. So, the core changes are split up into two sections, the persona changes and the actual combat changes. The combat changes have one detail I want to save for last, so let's start with the persona changes. First, they're once again raising the persona points, bringing it to 130 points. They actually did this during one of the test servers in the past, but went back on this decision. It might be strange bringing this back, but after seeing the other changes, it makes total sense. The reason this is being changed is because now they will be adding 4 nodes to each of the persona webs. 3 of these nodes will be 5-point nodes, and 1 of these nodes will be 15-point nodes. Because of that, it makes total sense as to why they would increase the cap to compensate. Nonetheless, I think this is a fantastic buff for both hunters and survivors as compensation. This basically allows more flexibility with your builds and allows better point distribution. Even with 120 points, you still need to skip out on grabbing or maxing out certain nodes because of the lack of points. It could be very annoying to deal with or even discourage some people from getting certain nodes. Now, you will have a greater opportunity to get those talents, which can help enrich your build even more. And if you already have everything you want on the old web, you could probably get one of the 4 new talents that are being added. I always felt like 130 points was already a very healthy change for them, so I'm really happy they decided to bring this back. Getting into the talents now, we'll start with the Hunter talents first before getting into the Survivor talents. Starting things off with no survivors, this talent got a bite-sized buff, which just increased the recovery speed by 10%. It's basically a 2% increase from the original 8%, which is somewhat nice. Although when compared with the other changes that they made, this is definitely the most tame of the bunch. Regardless, this is still a welcome change, especially to a talent that really didn't need any major changes. Next is Giant Claw, which is one of the few talents that got a secondary effect added to it. On top of the decreased struggle speed, when a survivor struggles free from the balloons, the team will gain a decoding penalty for 10 seconds. This scales based off the points you add, with the reduction being 10%, 15%, and 20%. Survivors rarely struggle free from Giant Claw, but when they do, it can be very punishing. Additionally, Giant Claw isn't really that popular to have, especially since you need 25 points to make it worth it. We don't really know how this talent will work on Harassers since that's an entirely different can of worms. However, I feel like this change will be good since it makes Giant Claw more appealing without buffing the struggle stats of it. There's nothing else to say, it's just an overall decent change. Hunt, on the other hand, got a pretty big buff. Now, the time it takes to activate it has been reduced by 1 second for all tiers. Not only that, but you'll gain a 10% vaulting buff when Hunt is activated. This is an overall great buff for Hunt, especially the faster activation time it has. It basically means you get the speed boost a lot faster in your chases, which makes it potentially viable on other hunters, like Wu-Chang, for example. Not only that, but the extra vaulting speed can be especially nice, especially on those god windows. I can definitely see this talent working especially well with other hunters in this game, so I think this is an overall fantastic change. Claustrophobia is up next, with it getting a much needed change in my opinion. Now, when there are 3 free moving survivors on the map, the gate opening speed will be reduced by 15%. Now, even if you're in a 4-man endgame and you down 1 survivor immediately, this talent will no longer be wasted. It's definitely not a lot, and I still don't like this talent conceptually. However, it'll definitely secure those ties when you need it, so it's an overall positive buff. Street Sweeper got a secondary effect as well as the tiers being changed slightly. Now, you will always have the 32-meter highlight when survivors are healing next to you from the get-go. However, depending on how much points you put into it, the healing speed of the highlighted survivors will be reduced. The numbers are 25%, 40%, and 55%, which require 15, 20, and 25 points to get per tier. Right out the bat, I think just getting the 32-meter highlight just for 15 points is already a massive change. This means you don't need to invest an absurd amount of points just to make this damn thing useful. This grants more flexibility as you can now invest in other talents if you want just the highlight range. However, on top of that, you will also be able to slow down survivors drastically if they are in your highlight range. This makes it impossible to try and heal next to the hunter, whether it be to try and push for a rescue or Dakota Cypher. 25% is already a pretty heavy debuff to try and heal through on its own. Now, it's essentially a death sentence if you try to heal up and the hunter finds you. Honestly, I felt like Street Sweeper was already a fairly underrated talent to run, mainly because it was so costly. However, with these changes, I can definitely see it fitting on a lot more builds on a lot more hunters. After Effects got an especially brutal buff to it. As your healing speed went down, it's now reduced by 10%, 20%, and 30%. Honestly, I feel like this is one of the first changes I'm not a big fan of. I get what they were going for, as they wanted to make it equivalent to Sticker. They wanted to still be useful to have if the survivor has self-heal, and this definitely helps with it. However, I feel like the change is a bit too overboard and can make certain hunters far more unbearable to face against. Slugging is already an incredibly unfun mechanic to go up against in matches, so having a change that promotes it just spells disaster. In terms of how good it is, it's an incredible change that'll help hunters deal with harassers a lot more often. For the health of the game, however, I'm definitely not looking forward to this change, especially against Smiley or Wheel. Impact is up next, with the numbers of the decreased healing speed being further reduced by 20%, 30%, and 40%. Again, this is another change that I am, yet again, not looking forward to in terms of health. Impact is already an extremely brutal talent to go up against, especially since it's a talent a lot of hunters can benefit from. You need to remember, this is a talent that can be further combined with both Panic and Deteriorate to slow healing speeds to a crawl. Trying to heal survivors with Impact 2 can already be extremely painful to do without a healer on the team. Now, survivors without a healer will need to spend 40% longer to heal players, 48% with Deteriorate and Panic. Now, the devs did throw a little solution to the issue, which I will cover when we talk about the survivor talents. However, I still think this is an extremely overboard change and something I am genuinely scared to go up against in terms of game health. So only make healing far more annoying and going against hunters who synergize with it a nightmare to face. Control Freak got its cooldown reduced to 10% per use, which is overall fine. It's funny how it matches the cooldown of Lizard Sleep, so it feels like they buffed this with him in mind. Regardless, it's a nice buff for an ability that is relatively niche in games you're not playing as Lizard. Addiction also got a new effect being added to it, which I think will be game changing in certain matchups. Now, when you are stunned, a slowdown effect is applied to every survivor within a 24-meter radius. For 4 seconds, any survivors in that radius will be slowed down between 10% and 20%, depending on how far they are from the hunter. The cooldown of it is 20 seconds, but I don't think that really matters. Honestly, out of all the anti-harassment changes they did, I feel like this one is the best one they did. It doesn't really matter how short a stun may be, all that matters is the distance a stun can grant. This can make it extremely frustrating to go up against multi-harassment teams, as it can make catching survivors impossible. This change makes it extremely hard to get away from a hunter being harassed, which grants them equal opportunity to catch them. It also puts the harasser in further danger, as the slowdown will make getting away from the hunter harder. I'm really happy with this change, and I can't wait to play with this talent, especially in 2v8 where it's needed. Finally, Tolerance got its numbers buff, with the knockback being reduced to 12%, 22%, and 32%, and slowdown being reduced to 12%, 18%, and 24%. With the amount of knockback and slowdown survivors being added now, I can definitely see why they would buff this talent. Funnily enough, this entire buff completely dunks on Antiquarian. Maybe this was made to try and shadow nerf her in any way? Regardless, this is a change I can honestly see either being added or not. I'm sure the prospect of making knockback survivors even weaker can ruffle a few feathers around a bit. It's an overall good change to hunters, but I can definitely see if people think it's too brutal. That's all for the changes of the old personas, but we're not done quite yet. Now, we will dive into the 4 new talents being added into this update, which I don't really have that nice things to say about them. First, we have Obsession, which is honestly the weakest of the 4 talents in my opinion. Basically, if you break Chase and there are no footprints in sight, your speed is increased by 6%! This lasts for 15 seconds and ends when you re-enter Chase or spot footprints. I'm not gonna lie, I think we found the winner for the worst talent in the game with this one. Like, seriously, when is something like this ever gonna be useful in an actual match? I guess if the survivor manages to sneak away, this can somewhat help you, I guess. However, the speed buff and the time that it lasts for are too small to make that much of an impact. It's not that good to leave Chase with, once again, because of how low the numbers are with this talent. The only time I could see this being useful if a survivor manages to sneak away from you. However, if there's a harasser nearby, this ability won't even appear because of them being in vicinity. This talent doesn't really seem strong enough to be worth bringing and doesn't seem all that useful to begin with. I could very well be wrong and this might be some meta-changing talent. However, just from reading what it does, it just sounds awful and not really worth bringing. Next is Overwhelm, which gives a 5% attack recovery buff for each survivor on the ground, with the max being 20%. This is basically a weaker no survivors, only with a global range. If I'm being honest, I could definitely see this being useful on certain hunters in this game. Obviously, this talent will be incredibly helpful on Percy, as his gimmick revolves around slugging. However, in situations where you need to slug in order to deal with harassers or when you get a double down, this talent can be really helpful. It also makes hunters who can slug easily, like Joseph and Smiley, far scarier to go up against with people on the floor. This can be further stacked with no survivors or berserkers to get insane attack recovery bonus on top of it. It's definitely not going to be an extremely broken talent to go up against, however, it can grant a lot of value on certain hunters, which can make it worth running. Vigilance is an ability that activates when the first 3 Cypher machines pop. For each Cypher pop, the hunter gains a 5% speed boost and a 10% pallet breaking speed for 10 seconds. This ability can stack with each pop, but gets permanently disabled when a survivor is placed on a rocket chair. Other than it being useful on a few weaker hunters, I don't really think this ability is anything useful. It's a talent that requires a lot of things to align for an ability that's not that strong. In addition, it's an ability that can only have full benefits the worse you are playing, which is bad. Even in the cases where those ciphers pop, if a survivor is on a rocket chair during that time, this ability becomes worthless. If I could compare this to something, I think it suffers from the same problems as Claustrophobia. If you're winning with this talent, it basically does nothing, and even if it activates, it can be negated easily. It's not worse than Obsession because I could see some situations where it can benefit you even if you're winning. However, I don't think this is a good talent, especially when you compare it to the other talents in this game. Finally, we have Famine, which grants a bit of early aim slowdown for the hunter. For the first 60 seconds, if there isn't any survivors within an 18 meter radius, the survivors will gain a 5% decoding debuff. Honestly, this talent doesn't seem that useful at all if I'm being honest. The only hunter I can really see this working on is Joseph if photo clones don't count as survivors. Otherwise, this ability just feels pointless all things considered. 5% slowdown on decoding is just pitiful for something that only works when no one's near you. Typically, you want to try and find survivors quickly in the match, as ciphers can fly by quickly otherwise. Because of that, you only really get 10 to 20 seconds max where this debuff is in effect. It's even worse in high tier matches because area selection is a thing, which helps you spawn closer to survivors. This talent basically grants no value for you to really capitalize on, which confuses me. If this was just 5% slowdown for 60 seconds and nothing else, I feel like this would have been fine. Additionally, if they bumped the number to 15 or 20%, it would have made sense as to why it was so limiting. As of now though, I don't really see a point to running this talent compared to the other talents. It's honestly a shame because I really like the idea of adding an early game slowdown for hunters. The early game can be incredibly rough for some players, so giving them a way to help out can be really cool. However, I feel like they fumbled the bag with this one, which is really sad to say. Regardless, that about covers all the changes that were made to the Hunter persona. Overall, while I don't think any of the new talents are anything spectacular, I'm overall happy with the changes that were made. There are definitely some changes in there I'm not a fan of, but I think their changes are more good than bad. I hope they either go back on a few of these problematic changes I mentioned, or at least tone them down a bit. However, in terms of buffing hunters, I think these changes were a much welcome addition to the game. I would go on and talk about the other changes now, but the script is already pretty long. Plus, I don't want to work on another full-length video after being done with the one earlier. Because of that, we'll stop here for now. I'll be back next time to talk about the other changes being added to the game very soon, so look forward to that. Until then, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all next time.